Hello, and welcome back to yet another terrifyingly awesome, marvelous video. There is something special in store for horror fanatics today. We are going to take a deep dive into the world of a show that has become a favorite even of the ones who are not horror geeks. Yes, it is none other than Mike Flanagan's The Haunting of Hill House. It is inspired by Shirley Jackson's novel of the same name. Released in 2018 as a Netflix miniseries, Flanagan was initially skeptical of how to go about the story. Well, he decided to give it his original spin and center the entire story around the Crane family. Full of psychological horrors, this series shows us what happens to a family after they have lived in a haunted house. There are terrifying ghosts, gruesome deaths, and the inability of the characters to run away from their own minds. And as if all of that was not enough, Flanagan decided to create mysteries around the Hill House like the Red Room that kept us wanting more. He obviously made sure that we fall in love with a haunted house so much that even we can't escape. So, wear your horror sunglasses and let us take a deep look at why The Haunting of Hill House is the best horror piece of the 21st century. But before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Traumatizing Childhood of the Crane Siblings. Usually, a typical haunted house story starts with a happy family moving into a new house, and eventually they start experiencing paranormal activities. Well, this haunted house is not a typical one. The series begins in media res, and it is almost as if we are directly thrown into the life of the Crane family. They have already started living in the Hill House, and a sense of terror seems to surround the 5 kids: Stephen, Shirley, Theodora, Nellie, and Luke. The opening scene shows the house at night, so we can obviously see the gothic beauty of it all. We can also feel the gigantic amount of eeriness looming within the long corridors. Everyone is asleep in their own bedrooms, but Nellie seems to be the first person who has an encounter with a ghost. And let me remind you, this is the ghost with whom Nellie's trauma begins. She seems to have seen a bent-neck lady and starts screaming and crying at the sight of her. It was not too long after that we got to see a silhouette of her standing beside Nellie's bed. I mean, that look scared the shit out of me, and I'm not even 6 years old, unlike Nellie when she first saw her. The bent-neck lady had very pale skin with black molds on her entire body, which made her look even gorier. Nellie ends up so traumatized after seeing her that she starts experiencing sleep paralysis. Even in adulthood, after moving away from Hill House, her sleep paralysis persists, and her character can be seen as the one most affected by the events that transpired at Hill House when she was a kid. Now, this was not the only encounter that one of the kids had with a supernatural entity. Even Luke started to see things, which was reflected in his drawings. He once drew a person whose mouth was wide open with hollowed eyes, as though the ghost was screaming with every breath in their body. Well, at the end of episode 1, you will realize that this drawing is exactly how Nellie's ghost appears in front of Stephen. Apart from this, as the episodes proceed, we find other frightening beings living in the shadows of Hill House. Luke ended up in the basement of Hill House through the dumbwaiter, and he noticed a creature that looked like a rotten dead body with burn marks all over its skeleton. Well, he was not even close to being dead because he started to crawl towards Luke, grabbed his t-shirt, and attacked him. But Luke was so helpless that he could not do anything but yell in terror. Well, Luke does not end up naming this ghost, unlike Nellie, but after the release of the show, we find out through one of the writers that this basement ghost is Hazel Hill's son, Edward Hill. We will explore more on that later in the video. Now, Luke also has another close encounter with an even more terrifying ghost. And just like Nellie's bent neck lady, this ghost's image stays with Luke much into his adult life. The monster he sees is as tall as a giraffe, moves around with the help of a cane, wears a bowler hat that Luke was fascinated with when his parents found it, and appears to be floating in the air as he walks. I would definitely not want someone like that to spot me alone in the dead of the night. I mean, imagine what Luke must have felt. He was just 6 years old, so in his head, this guy could easily gobble him up. Now, once again, this was never mentioned in the show, but in the stories that one of the show's writers was posting, we find out that this tall ghost was none other than William Hill. Actually, if you have a keen eye for noticing every small detail, then you must have picked up something peculiar in episode 5. Mrs. Dudley, the housekeeper who helps the Crane family in cleaning and maintaining Hill House, tells Nellie about Hazel Hill by showing her a picture of Hazel as a young woman. Well, right there, beside Hazel, is a picture of a man in a bowler hat. So, if you connect the dots, you will see that it looks awfully similar to the tall ghost Luke saw. Nellie and Luke definitely seemed to experience a lot more terrifying supernatural activities compared to the other siblings. Maybe that is because they are the youngest, and that is why it is easier for the ghost to manipulate them. Now, Theodora is older than the twins, and her character has been crafted magnificently. She seems to have a sort of ability where she can sense things upon touch. Events in Hill House started to get even more spine-chilling with her ability. When she touched her mother, Olivia's hand this one time, Theo saw her suddenly covered in blood, with the left side of her face completely disfigured. She looked so terrifying that I am sure that would have given me mommy issues. I think it is safe to say that maybe in this manner, Theo could always tell either the past or the future of the thing or person she touches, because Olivia did end up dying in Hill House. The next older sibling, Shirley, experienced the jump scare of a lifetime when suddenly a spider crawled out of her dead cat's mouth. That also reminds me of the vivid music video for "You Should See Me in a Crown" by Billie Eilish. If Shirley loved spiders as much as Billie does, then maybe she would not have been mortified forever. And I say forever because this was Shirley's defining moment. Years later, when she was cleaning the corpse of her youngest sister, Nellie, she saw a spider crawl out of her mouth, too. We have to agree that Flanigan's choices of mentally traumatizing all of them certainly went beyond the TV screens and left us scarred for life as well. Now, the oldest sibling, Stephen, always believed that he never saw a ghost during his time at Hill House. But it was not until episode 8 that we finally find out the reality of what he saw. Hugh explains to Stephen that the old man he saw repairing an old antique clock in the house was actually a ghost because Hugh never hired such a person. Then we see a shot where this ghost has also appeared in front of the rest of the Crane family but remains in the background. Another strange fact is that Hugh never built a treehouse where Luke and Stephen used to spend time together. An adult Stephen also saw a ghost, but this time it's not an unknown creature. Toward the end of the first episode, he sees the ghost of his recently deceased sister, Nellie, and I do not think they could have made her ghost any creepier. I mean, her eyeballs were entirely white. She looked so pale, and then she suddenly screamed in Stephen's face. And just like the drawing by Kid Luke, she died wearing a light pink dress. Maybe the twin thing that Luke and Nellie shared was trying to send him future signals. All of these incidents are sure to give anyone a lifetime subscription to trauma. The Hill family, the originals. Let us now take a look at some of the people who are extremely crucial to the way the Hill House works. They appear as ghosts who are the remnants of the Hill family, the ones who used to own this vast mansion we know as Hill House. Now, this is where Mike Flanagan showed us his true genius intellect. He gave the two most important people of the Hill family such a stunning backstory that it probably justifies why they live as ghosts in Hill House. William Hill was admitted into a mental asylum as a young boy by his family. During his time there, he met Poppy Walters, who was also admitted there for the same reason. The two fell in love, got married, and soon moved into Hill House. A clinically insane love story, right? I know what you were thinking. It sounds a little like the Joker and Harley Quinn. But the tragedy of William and Poppy's lives is surrounded by everything terrifying. You see, his father, Jacob Hill, built the Hill House on what we have fallen in love with, out of fear, of course. Sadly, William's mother died even before it was finished, and the worst part, she died on the construction site. So, she is technically the first woman to die in Hill House. Well, several people believe that perhaps this is how the Hill House gained its sinister ability to trap the souls of whoever dies on its property. Now, while living at Hill House, William and Poppy Hill had two children, a son named Eugene and a daughter whose name we never find out. Eugene had a disease that confined him to a wheelchair and soon led to his death. Their daughter had some respiratory problems, as explained by Poppy in her monologue in episode 9. She apparently choked on her own body, struggled to breathe, and died. Now, the way that this scene has been portrayed, I cannot help but believe that perhaps Poppy killed her own kids. You see, when she talks about her daughter, she says that she was holding her little girl's hand as she struggled to breathe, and her son was apparently banging on the walls for her. She says it almost so harshly that one cannot help but notice that maybe she was pissed off with her son's constant banging on the walls, so she decided to kill him. She was clinically insane, after all. By the way, does this remind you of episode 2, maybe? Remember in the middle of the night, there was suddenly a loud banging on the walls in Shirley's room? Maybe that was Poppy and William's dead son. Poppy's entire personality is clearly one of the big reasons why, as a ghost, she chose to appear in front of Olivia, of all people. The mental psyche of a mother can only be poisoned by another mother. We often saw Poppy in a rotten ghost form, but particularly in this episode, she appeared as a lifelike ghost. Based on her rotten form, we could say that maybe she died of old age because it is never clearly mentioned. She seems to bond with Olivia by constantly pressing on her fear of losing her kids one day. It is possible that Poppy herself planted those fears in Olivia's brain to drive her crazy. I guess Hill House then could be a manifestation of Poppy's malice, since she clearly feeds off of it. Flanagan's brilliance in creating Olivia's character is one of the best things about this show. Often, the conversation around her seems to be looming with the idea of death. In the second episode itself, she says, "We all become stories in the end." It is as if she is always connected with death. And because her kids never knew the truth about her death much into their adult lives, she also ends up adding to their trauma since they often see her dead body come to life covered in black molds. It was too sad how Olivia was pushed to the edge of insanity by Poppy, but I personally loved this twist in the story. Flanagan definitely outdid himself by connecting the Hill and the Crane family with every intricate detail. Now, enough about Poppy. Remember Luke's tall ghost? Well, unlike Poppy, William was literally living in Hill House even after the Crane family moved in. He died in the basement of the house by building a wall around himself. He soon regretted it because, till the present day of Hill House events, we could hear him scratching from inside the walls as though he wanted to come out. This scratching is how Hugh Crane stumbled upon his skeleton and ended up helping the police in closing an extremely long cold case about William's disappearance. Now, don't ask me why he did this. He was also clinically insane, after all. Apart from this couple's ghost, we also see the ghost of Hazel Hill. Clearly, the Hill family had no intentions of ever vacating the house, even after their deaths. Hazel is William's sister, and she used to live in Hill House with her daughter Jacqueline, William and Poppy Hill, and their 2 kids. Hazel's ghost first appears in front of Theo and Luke in the form of a reflection, but just like Poppy, we get to communicate with her through Olivia. I am surprised how Olivia did not lose her breath when she saw Hazel's ghost because she died of old age while being really sick. So naturally, her ghost looked way more terrifying with a wrinkled and rotten face. Something common about both Poppy and Hazel's ghosts is that they appeared to have black mold-like lines all over their bodies. In fact, in the last episode of the show, Poppy's black molds seemed to spread to whichever member of the Crane family she touched. Maybe these molds are supposed to be another way through which Flanagan wanted to symbolize the malice of the Hill family. Now, if you remember, a young Shirley found some kittens in a shed, and she was afraid that the dogs might hurt them. According to Mr. Dudley, in his so many years of service, he had never seen dogs near Hill House. But we do hear the dogs at night when the kids are often woken up due to something sinister. Well, there is a story that perhaps, after Jacob Hill died, Hazel killed his dogs in the middle of the night. So maybe the dogs that the siblings hear barking and howling every night are those dogs. I guess there are unseen dog ghosts as well because their barks clearly make the night more terrifying than it already is. So, have you noticed the parallels Flanagan has drawn so far? I mean, Poppy appears only in front of Olivia until the last episode where everyone gets to see her. William's decayed body was found by Hugh. One of Poppy and William's kids might have been terrifying Olivia and Hugh's kids. Nellie was so fascinated by Hazel's daughter Jacqueline's cup of stars that she continued to use one as an adult. So, even though we do not see Jacqueline's ghost, her life gets entwined with Nellie's. Well, looks like the house probably wanted a couple for a couple, kids in exchange for kids, and a matriarch for a matriarch. The horror of Hill House. Remember, Stephen told us from the beginning of the show that Hill House, not sane, stood by itself against its hills holding darkness within. Well, that is the beauty of our Hill House. You cannot try to make sense of everything it does. Otherwise, just like Nellie, you would also go insane. In the very first minutes of the show, we see Hill House in its entirety, surrounded by mist, standing tall and dark as though it has never seen light. It looks like the very definition of Gothic. Even from within, we see that there are carved faces on the borders of the wall. The staircase looks magnificent yet terrifying, the doorknobs have faces of animals carved on them, and the hallways look so huge that you could easily get lost trying to figure out which room belongs to which sibling. From these initial clips, you can already figure out that everything about the Hill House will be spooky and scary since it has a very strong, eerie presence. Soon into the first episode, we are introduced to one of the biggest mysteries of the show, the Red Room. The red door is also shown at the end of the theme tune that is played at the beginning. The siblings have tried their hardest to find a key that will unlock this door, but nothing seems to work. In fact, to continue the element of terror and shock, the mystery of the Red Room persisted even till the 7th episode. We did find out one thing about houses from Olivia. In episode 2, she says that a house works like a human body to keep the people living inside safe and healthy. The dining room is a heart, the walls are like bones, the pipes like veins. Well, when it comes to Hill House, in episode 10, Nellie's ghost told us that the Red Room was like the stomach, since it was feeding off everyone in the Crane family. For the longest time, everyone thought they could not get inside the Red Room, but it was not until the end that they realized that they had all experienced a version of the Red Room. In fact, to keep us terrified, we saw the shadow of 2 feet through the gap under the door. I mean, after that scene, I definitely thought that Hill House was about to unleash a ghost that would psychologically damage everyone to such an extent that maybe the whole family would go insane. Well, towards the end, we find out that the Red Room presented itself as something unique to each person. For Luke, it was a tree house. It was Nellie's toy room, Theo's dance studio, Shirley's family room, Stephen's game room, and their mom, Olivia's reading room. The Red Room was foreshadowed all along. In episode 1, Shirley, in her sleep, kept saying, "Dancing in the Red Room." That was, of course, a hint at Theo's dance studio, the same person whose feet's shadow we saw. In fact, if you look at all these versions of the Red Room, you will realize that the window is always in the same place, signifying that it is the exact same room. It is as if the Red Room is a manifestation of that happy place in your head where you like to be alone. And, of course, since it wants to feed on you, it needs you to be alone. Except for a brief moment in the treehouse, we only see the family alone when they are in these spaces. Well, now, if you are wondering why Hugh did not have a version of the Red Room, then let me spark your curiosity. It was just a theory, but if you think about it, Hugh was always fixing things in Hill House. He looks at himself as someone who can fix everything, so by not letting him find the key or being able to break the locks, the Red Room kept Hugh mentally occupied with the fact that he could not fix it, so he must keep on trying. Another interesting interpretation of the Hill House came from Olivia. Remember that big stormy night when a lot of the windows shattered and it left the house with water damage everywhere? Well, Olivia said that Hill House is schizophrenic because none of the blueprints seemed to match with each other. And there were parts of the house missing from the blueprints, like the basement that Luke found. The analogy of a mental disorder here seems quite appropriate since the house ends up having that effect on its inhabitants. In fact, I also believe that the Hill House affected women more because Mr. Dudley, the housekeeper, mentioned that his mother got scattered after working there for too long. Even his wife, Clara, started to hear things like the cries of their deceased first baby, who was stillborn. And we already know its hold on Poppy Hill and Olivia Crane. It also felt like the house was probably bonded to Nell because on that same stormy night, everyone thought Nell had gone missing, but she was standing in front of them the whole time. It was as if the house had masked her from everyone. There was also a carving on the wall that said, "Come home, Nell," as if the house was calling the future Nellie. I mean, in the end, that did end up being true since Nellie went back to the Hill House all alone and lived the fantasy of being reunited with her dead husband Arthur Vance and her dead mother. Soon after, she died, so maybe the house wanted her to stay forever. The reason behind this hunger for a female soul could be due to the fact that the first death in Hill House was of a woman, William Hill's mother. However, I know Mike Flanagan would disagree with me on this since he had mentioned in an interview that the house affected everyone to the same degree. The only difference was it was easier to see its effects on a few people compared to the others. Well, that also makes sense since he did confirm that all 5 siblings represented different stages of grief. Steve was in denial, Shirley is anger, Theo is bargaining, Luke is depression, and Nell is acceptance. Perhaps that is why Nell was the one Hill House got to keep forever. And if we look at the adult lives of the siblings, it is pretty much formed around the things that are either connected to Hill House or as a result of living in it. Stephen became a writer who writes about haunted houses, and for that purpose, he also researches other people's experiences with supernatural entities. Shirley has her own business, but that business is running a funeral home where she also fixes up the deceased corpses before putting them in an open casket for the funeral ceremony. Theo is a child psychologist, and she deals with kids who face issues like having hallucinations. Luke is nothing but a drug addict, constantly going back and forth from rehab. As for Nellie, well, her sleep paralysis persisted for so long that she ended up having to see a doctor on top of already seeing a therapist due to the unforgettable Hill House trauma. Although she did find the love of her life in Arthur Vance, his tragic death just brought the bent-neck lady back into her life until she finally became the ghost herself. It is evident that their lives are completely surrounded by grief and death. And if you ever found yourself asking why, after growing up, the siblings went back to Hill House when they already knew the horrors that lie within, then do not forget old Hugh's words to Stephen. The Crane family is like an unfinished meal to Hill House. Once it got the taste of their family, they could not just run away before dinner time. The house would not allow that. It is like the representation of a parasitic monster that feeds off fear. Mike Flanagan's brainchild. All the actors in Haunting of Hill House definitely made a huge impact in making this show a success, but it is Flanagan's brainchild after all. The inspiration that he took from Shirley Jackson's novel of the same name ended up giving us a horror series like no other. Well, Flanagan made some exceptionally great directional choices right from the beginning, where we see a lot of zoom-in shots that make things scarier. Now, at this point, I am sure you are aware that time is not linear in this show. We are constantly being taken to the past from the present and to the present from the past. Even this transition is done so seamlessly that the jump scares are totally worth it. If you notice the present scenes and the flashback scenes, you will realize that the non-linear narrative is further differentiated based on color patterns. The flashback scenes seem to have more life in them. All the colors are more defined. During the day scenes, everything appears bright, like different shades of red are captured accurately. Even in the night scenes, the darkness is overpowering, which shows the depth of fear in the Crane family. But the present scenes are in complete contrast to them. They are a bit gloomier in texture, like a combination of washed out blue, a faded white texture, and gray. This color palette is more pale and cold, which probably symbolizes all the life that has been sucked out of them. They are so intertwined with grief and unhappiness that the colors just cannot be bright. I mean, if that is not some serious psychological depiction, then I do not know what is. Another amazing execution was of the long continuous shot in episode 6, which was of around 17 minutes. Both the present and flashback scenes are in long shot, which adds a sense of urgency and tension to the entire episode. It is almost as if Flanagan wants us to know that the Crane family will never forget this day for as long as they are alive. Imagine the amount of accuracy that must have gone into it. After all, the entire episode was shot in just 5 long takes. It was clearly a defining episode, since this is when Hugh and Olivia also started seeing ghosts in the house. Even the parallels between the past and the present are brought out through Nellie's character. In the flashback scene, suddenly nobody in the house could see her, even though she was standing right there. In the present scene, where everyone is gathered in Shirley's funeral home for her death, Nellie is standing as the bent-neck lady right next to everyone, but nobody can see her. This non-linear pattern clearly keeps our curious horses running, since at the end of each episode, we are left on the edge of a cliff with thousands of questions. Now, one of the most exciting and terrifying things that Flanagan decided to do was to add hidden ghosts in the background all through the series. There were literally actors ready on set to go appear as a ghost anytime. You would have to pay a lot of attention to spot all of them, and even now, no one has managed to spot all these hidden ghosts. Well, one of the easy ones to find showed up right at the beginning of the first episode near the staircase as we are getting our first glimpse inside Hill House. You can also spot ghosts in this climactic scene when Hugh and Stephen are trying to make an escape from Hill House. Oh, and here is one of the creepiest ones. Even though this ghost is hidden inside the basement, who knows whether it is the same one that attacked Luke or not. Hill House is full of ghosts anyway. If there is one thing I hate more than a basement ghost, is one that is completely bald. These ghosts just keep getting creepier. Poor Theo. Looks like the ghosts are always watching. Look at these rotten hands under the piano. I feel like the ghost is just ready to jump at Nellie anytime now. Well, these were just a few. Let us know how many you have spotted so far. I must say, if I was not already a fan of Flanigan after watching his Oculus in 2013, then The Haunting of Hill House would definitely make me one. What about other horrific stories? When we think of the horror genre in the 21st century, there are a couple of films that refuse to leave my mind. One of them, of course, the absolutely nerve-wracking The Conjuring, which came out in 2013. I will not deny that it definitely changed the face of the genre with its mind-numbing terror. But compared to The Haunting of Hill House, it has a much more linear structure, and it seems like a traditional haunted house story where Ed and Lorraine Warren are doing some good old paranormal investigation. Hill House, on the other hand, as we already know, has a non-linear plot that adds depth to its mystery and character development. Now, of course, one thing is true. Both of them are focused on family, but Hill House explores the psyche of each character, be it the ones who are alive or dead. In that sense, it has a more character-driven approach to horror. There's also the difference that The Conjuring leans more towards the old-school terror of possession, but the series dives into a more psychological level of horror. Well, another film that we could consider slightly similar to The Haunting of Hill House would be Hereditary. This film also ties itself deeply to familial bonds. In fact, the terror stems out of generational instability in Annie's family. But one could say that Hereditary is centered more around occultism and supernatural entities like a literal demon. We do not get to see that in Hill House, which makes it even more interesting because in the horror universe, demons making bad things happen to people have become a bit too common at this point. And, of course, since both The Conjuring and Hereditary are films, they do not get the space to explore every single detail. So, the pacing of Hill House stands out great since it takes us through all the corners of a character's mind. Now, it would be incomplete to talk about The Haunting without mentioning Bly Manor. The cast was impeccable, and so was the storyline. But in my opinion, Hill House still has the edge over Bly Manor. Firstly, after watching Hill House, you get the feeling of rewatching it at some point, especially if you want to find all of the hidden ghosts. That sort of a feeling, at least for me, was missing from Bly Manor. But a major reason would be that the monsters in Bly Manor did not seem to have as much depth as the ones in Hill House. Don't get me wrong, the woman on the lake scared me as much as the bent-necked lady, but Hill House gave them all an exceptionally good backstory, which is lacking in Bly Manor. After all, it literally turned Nellie's traumatic ghost into her own self, and clearly, Hill House did make a way for future projects under the Haunting series. Marvelous verdict. Well, my dear horror fanatics, that brings us to the end of yet another marvelous video. The love for The Haunting of Hill House is not hidden from anyone, and as we have explored, this love is completely justified. I mean, we have to applaud Mike Flanigan for giving us such a wonderful take on haunted house stories. I am still astonished at the way he managed to connect both the Hill family and the Crane family. Hill House has done it all by showing us the inner emotions of grief in each character and how their childhood traumas ended up shaping their adult lives. Well, what are some of your favorite moments from the show? Was there anything particular about any character or ghost that you loved the most? And were you able to find all of Flanigan's hidden ghosts? We heard that there are at least 8 to 12 of them in each episode. Do let us know all about it in the comments down below. And if you like this video, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button on your way out. It means the world to us when you help us grow. Until next time, guys, it is goodbye. Have a good one.